You keep telling yourself you'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll wake up early. Tomorrow you'll be disciplined. Tomorrow you'll finally take control. But tomorrow has become your favorite hiding place. It's comfortable there, isn't it? No pressure, no accountability, just endless delay. Meanwhile, your goals sit there, untouched, slowly fading while time moves on without asking for your permission. Laziness is not just about doing nothing. It's about choosing comfort over growth, distraction over purpose, excuses over action. It whispers to you, telling you that you deserve a break, that you'll feel more ready later, that one more scroll, one more nap, one more delay won't hurt. But it does hurt. It's stealing your potential piece by piece, day by day. You don't lack talent. You don't lack talent. You don't lack ideas. You lack execution. You shouldn't. And execution doesn't come from motivation. It comes from discipline. Motivation is temporary, comes and goes like a wave. Discipline is what stays when you don't feel like doing anything at all. It's what gets you out of bed when your mind is full of excuses. It's what pushes you to start even when you're tired, bored, or unprepared. Look at your life honestly. Are you where you want to be? Are you proud of how you spend your time, or are you constantly negotiating with yourself, lowering your standards just to stay comfortable? Because deep down, you know what needs to be done. You've always known. The problem is knowing is easy. Doing is hard. But here's the truth. You don't need to feel ready. You need to start. Action creates momentum, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel motivated before you work. You work, and that builds motivation. Every small step forward weakens laziness and strengthens discipline. Right now, there's something you've been avoiding. That task, that goal, that responsibility. Is sitting there waiting, and every second you delay it grows heavier mind. The longer you wait, the harder it feels. But the moment you start, even just a little, you take your power back. Stop overthinking. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There's only now. This moment right here is your opportunity to prove to yourself that you're not controlled by comfort, that you're not a slave to your excuses. You have work to do. Real work. Work that matters. Work that can change your life if you commit to it. But it won't get done by wishing, planning endlessly, or talking about it. It gets done by showing up again and again, especially on the days you don't feel like it. You have to decide what you want more, comfort or progress, because you can't have both. Every time you choose comfort, you move further away from the life you say you want. Every time you choose action, no matter how small, you move closer. So kill your laziness. Not tomorrow, not later. Now, get up, start messy, start imperfect, start tired if you have to. Just start. Because the life you want is built by the work you do when you don't feel like doing anything at all. Tomorrow feels safe because it asks nothing from you right now. It gives you permission to delay without guilt, to push responsibility just far enough that you don't have to face it. Yeah. But that comfort comes at a cost. Every time you say you'll start tomorrow, you reinforce a habit of avoidance. You train your mind to believe that action is optional and delay is acceptable. Over time, this doesn't just affect one task, it becomes your default behavior. Think about how many times you've made a promise to yourself and pushed it forward. You said you'd wake up earlier, start that project, work on your goals, take control. And maybe you meant it in the moment. Maybe you even felt a surge of motivation. But when the moment to act arrived, you hesitated. Oh, you told yourself you'd do it later. That hesitation is where progress dies. Not in failure, not in lack of ability, but in the quiet decision to wait. The truth is, tomorrow is an illusion. When it arrives, it looks exactly like today. It comes with the same distraction, the same excuses, the same feelings of not being ready. Nothing magically changes overnight. You don't suddenly become more disciplined, more focused, or more capable. If you don't act today, there's no reason to believe you'll act tomorrow. The cycle continues, and days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and before you realize it, time has moved on without you. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in how you see action. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need ideal conditions. You don't need to feel completely ready. Waiting for those things is just another form of delay. What you need is a decision. A firm, immediate decision to start where you are with what you have, even if it's messy, even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant. Action doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. There's a certain discomfort that comes with starting. It's unfamiliar, sometimes overwhelming, and often inconvenient. But that discomfort is a sign of growth. It means you're stepping out of the pattern that's been holding you back. When you act despite that feeling, you build something far more valuable than temporary motivation. You build self-trust. You prove to yourself that when you say you'll do something, you follow through. And that changes everything. Because once you start trusting your own word, your confidence grows. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop looking for excuses. You begin to operate with a sense of urgency and control. You realize that action isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose. It also helps to understand that starting is often the hardest part. Your mind will resist it, creating all kinds of reasons to delay. It will tell you that you need more time, more energy, more clarity. But once you push through that initial resistance, things begin to flow. The task that seemed overwhelming becomes manageable. The fear that held you back begins to fade. Momentum takes over, and what once felt difficult becomes part of your routine. If you keep waiting for tomorrow, you stay stuck in a loop of intention without action. But when you decide that today's the only time that matters, everything shifts. You stop giving power to your excuses. You stop relying on motivation that may never come. You take control of your time instead of letting it slip away. This isn't about making huge changes overnight. It's about refusing to delay the next step. It's about choosing to act in the present moment, no matter how small that action may seem. Because small actions, repeated consistently, create real progress. So when you catch yourself saying you'll start tomorrow, pause and question it. Ask yourself what's really stopping you right now. Most of the time, the answer won't be a lack of ability. It will be a habit of delay. And habits can be changed, but only through action. You don't need another day. You don't need another chance. You need to use the moment you already have. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to begin. But the moment you decide to act, you break the pattern. You take back control and you move forward, not someday, but now. Laziness doesn't always look like doing nothing. Sometimes it looks like staying busy with things that don't matter, choosing easy tasks over meaningful ones, or convincing yourself that rest is needed when deep down you know it's avoidable. It grows quietly in moments where comfort feels more appealing than effort, where immediate ease wins over long-term gain. Each time that choice is made, it becomes a little easier to repeat until it turns into a pattern that shapes your daily life. Comfort is seductive because it offers instant relief. It removes pressure, eliminates struggle, and allows you to stay in a space where nothing is demanded of you. But growth doesn't exist in that space. Progress requires tension, effort, and sometimes discomfort. When comfort becomes the priority, anything that challenges you starts to feel like a burden instead of an opportunity. Tasks that once felt achievable begin to seem overwhelming, not because they are, but because your tolerance for effort has decreased. This is how laziness expands. It feeds on small decisions. Skipping one task doesn't seem like a big deal. Choosing to rest instead of work feels justified. Delaying effort for a little longer appears harmless, but these small choices accumulate. They lower your standards over time. What was once considered a minimum level of effort slowly fades, replaced by a habit of doing less and expecting the same results. That gap between what you want and what you're willing to do begins to widen. There's also a psychological trap involved. When you choose comfort repeatedly, your mind starts to rationalize it. You tell yourself you deserve a break, that you'll be more productive later, that conditions aren't right yet. These justifications feel logical in the moment, but they reinforce the behavior. Instead of recognizing avoidance, you label it as rest or preparation. This makes it harder to break the cycle because you no longer see it as a problem. Over time, this pattern affects more than just productivity. It impacts confidence and self-respect. When you consistently avoid effort, you start to question your own ability to follow through. You lose trust in yourself. Promises you make feel less meaningful because they're often broken. This creates a sense of frustration, not because you don't know what to do, but because you're not doing what you already know. Choosing comfort over purpose also disconnects you from your goals. Ambition requires action. Without consistent effort, goals remain ideas rather than realities. The longer you stay in a state of inaction, the more distant those goals feel. Eventually, they even start to seem unrealistic. Not because they are, but because your current habits don't support them. What once felt possible begins to feel out of reach. Breaking this pattern starts with awareness. Recognizing when you're choosing comfort as an escape rather than as genuine recovery is crucial. Crucial. Rest is necessary, but there's a difference between recharging and avoiding responsibility. Honest reflection helps you see that difference. It forces you to confront the choices you're making and their long-term impact. From there, it becomes about shifting your priorities. Instead of asking what feels easiest in the moment, you begin to ask what moves you forward. This doesn't mean rejecting comfort entirely, but it means not letting it control your decisions. It means accepting that some level of discomfort is part of any meaningful progress. Effort, struggle, and even temporary frustration are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that you're pushing beyond your current limits. Consistency plays a key role in reversing the growth of laziness. When you start choosing effort, even in small ways, you weaken the habit of avoidance. Each action reinforces a new pattern. It shows your mind that discomfort is manageable, that effort leads to progress, and that you are capable of following through. Over time, this builds resilience. Tasks that once felt difficult become normal. The resistance you used to feel begins to fade. It's also important to understand that comfort is not inherently negative. It becomes a problem only when it replaces purpose, balance, balance. There are moments when rest is necessary and beneficial. But when rest turns into a default response to anything challenging, it limits your growth. The goal is not to eliminate comfort, but to ensure it doesn't come at the expense of your progress. The choice between comfort and purpose is not a one-time decision. It's made repeatedly throughout each day, in small moments when no one is watching, when it would be easy to take the easier path. Those moments define your trajectory. They determine whether laziness continues to grow or begins to shrink. Ultimately, the direction your life takes is shaped by what you prioritize. If comfort consistently comes first, progress will always come second. But when you start valuing effort and purpose more than immediate ease, everything begins to shift. You regain control over your action. You rebuild trust in yourself. And you move closer to the results you've been wanting, not by waiting, but by choosing differently again and again. Motivation feels powerful when it's there. It gives you energy, excitement, and a sense that anything is possible. In those moments, starting feels easy. You make plans, set goals, and imagine a better version of your life. But motivation has one major flaw. It doesn't last quickly as it appears. It depends on mood, environment, and circumstances that are constantly changing. If you rely on it to take action, your progress becomes inconsistent, unpredictable, and fragile. There will be days when you don't feel inspired, days when you're tired, distracted, or simply not in the mood to do anything productive. If motivation is your only driver, those days become lost opportunities. Work gets postponed, responsibilities are ignored, and momentum disappears. This is why so many people start strong but fail to continue. They wait to feel ready again instead of learning how to act without that feeling. Discipline works differently. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It's built on decisions, habits, and commitment. It's the ability to follow through regardless of your emotional state. When you're disciplined, you don't ask whether you feel like doing something. You do it because you decided it matters. This removes the constant negotiation that happens in your mind when motivation is low. At first, discipline can feel restrictive. It asks you to act even when you'd rather not, to choose effort over comfort, to prioritize long-term results over immediate satisfaction. But over time, it becomes a source of freedom. It simplifies your choices. Instead of debating whether to act, you follow a system that you've already committed to. This reduces mental resistance and makes it easier. Consistency is where real progress happens. Small actions repeated over time lead to significant results. Motivation might help you take the first step, but discipline ensures you keep moving forward. It turns effort into routine and routine into habit. Once something becomes a habit, it requires less energy to maintain. What once felt difficult becomes part of your normal behavior. Another important difference is reliability. Motivation is unpredictable. Some days it's strong, other days it's completely absent. Discipline, on the other hand, can be built and strengthened. It grows each time you follow through on what you said you would do. Every completed task reinforces your ability to stay consistent. Over time, this builds confidence, not the kind that comes from feeling good, but the kind that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. There's also a shift in identity that comes with discipline. When you consistently act, despite not feeling motivated, you start to see yourself differently. You stop identifying as someone who needs to be inspired to act and start becoming someone who takes action regardless. This change in self-perception is powerful because it influences future behavior. You begin to expect more from yourself and you're less willing to settle for excuses. Discipline also helps you manage discomfort. Many tasks that lead to growth are not immediately enjoyable. They require focus, effort, and sometimes repetition. Motivation might help you tolerate this for a short time, but discipline allows you to persist through it. It trains you to accept that discomfort is part of the process, not something to avoid. This mindset makes challenges more manageable and reduces the tendency to give up when things get difficult. It's important to understand that discipline doesn't mean perfection. There will still be days when you fall short, when things don't go as planned. The difference is that discipline helps you recover quickly. Instead of letting one missed action turn into a pattern, you return to your routine. You maintain momentum by minimizing the impact of setbacks. Building discipline starts with small, consistent actions. It's not about making drastic changes overnight. It's about choosing a few meaningful tasks and committing to them daily. The key is repetition. Each time you act, you strengthen the habit. Each time you resist the urge to delay, you reinforce your commitment. Over time, these small decisions accumulate, creating a strong foundation for long-term progress. Environment can also support discipline, reducing distraction, setting clear expectations, and creating structure in your day. Make it easier to follow through. While discipline ultimately comes from within, external factors can either support or weaken it. Being intentional about your surroundings helps maintain consistency. In the end, relying on motivation alone keeps you stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. You move forward when you feel good and stall when you don't. Discipline breaks that cycle. It provides stability, direction, and control. It ensures that your progress is not dependent on temporary emotions, but on consistent action. When you shift your focus from feeling motivated to being disciplined, you stop waiting for the right moment and start creating it through action. You build habits that support your goals, develop resilience in the face of challenges, and move forward with a sense of purpose that doesn't fade with your mood. That's what makes discipline far more powerful. It stays when motivation is gone and keeps you moving when nothing else will. There is a quiet frustration that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done and still not doing it. It's not confusion, it's not lack of information, and it's not because the path is unclear. The steps are already in front of you. You've thought about them, planned them, maybe even written them down. Yet action doesn't follow. This gap between knowing and doing is where most progress gets lost. Understanding something gives a false sense of accomplishment. When you learn, plan, or think deeply about a goal, it feels productive. It creates the illusion that you're moving forward. Even when nothing has actually changed, you convince yourself that you're preparing, that you're getting ready to take action. But preparation without execution becomes a form of delay. It keeps you in a comfortable space where effort is minimal and risk is low. The reality is that knowledge has no value without application. You can read, watch, and learn as much as you want, but if it never translates into action, it doesn't impact your life. Execution is what turns ideas into results. It's the step where effort becomes visible, where progress becomes measurable, and where change actually happens. Without it, everything stays theoretical. One reason execution feels difficult is because it exposes you to uncertainty. When you act, there's a chance of failure, mistakes, or outcomes that don't match your expectations. Staying in the phase of knowing protects you from that discomfort. It allows you to stay in control, to avoid judgment, and to maintain the belief that you could succeed if you really try. But that belief means nothing if it's never tested. There's also a tendency to overcomplicate action. You might think you need more clarity, better time, or the perfect strategy before you begin. This creates a cycle where you keep refining your plan instead of implementing it. The focus shifts from doing the thinking, from progress to perfection. But perfection is not a requirement for starting. In fact, waiting for it often guarantees that you never begin. Execution requires a different mindset. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to figure things out along the way. When you take action, you gain feedback. You see what works and what doesn't. You learn through experience, not just theory. This kind of learning is more effective because it's tied to real outcomes. It forces you to adapt, improve, and grow. Another barrier to execution is internal resistance. Even when you know what to do, your mind may push back. It looks for easier alternatives, distractions, or reasons to delay. This resistance is natural, especially when a task involves effort or discomfort. The key is not to eliminate resistance, but to act despite. Waiting for it to disappear only keeps you stuck. Breaking the gap between knowing and doing often starts with reducing the size of the action. When a task feels overwhelming, it's easier to avoid. But when you break it down into smaller steps, it becomes more manageable. Instead of focusing on the entire goal, you focus on the next action. This lowers the barrier to entry and makes it easier to begin. Consistency also plays a crucial role. Execution is not a one-time event, a repeated behavior. One action won't create lasting change, but consistent action will. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the habit of doing. Over time, this builds momentum and reduces the effort required to continue. There's also an element of accountability. When you hold yourself to a standard, when you treat your commitments seriously, execution becomes non-negotiable. It shifts from something you might do to something you must do. This doesn't require external pressure. It comes from an internal decision to respect your own goals and the time you have. It's important to recognize that execution won't always feel rewarding in the moment. Results take time. Progress can be slow, times invisible. This is where many people lose focus. They expect immediate outcomes and become discouraged when they don't see them. But the value of execution lies in the process, not just the result. Each action contributes to a larger outcome, even if it's not immediately obvious. Over time, closing the gap between knowing and doing changes how you see yourself. You begin to trust your ability to follow through. You stop relying on intentions and start relying on behavior. This builds confidence, not from thinking about success, but from actively working toward it. In the end, the difference between where you are and where you want to be is not what you know. It's what you do. Knowledge sets the direction, but execution drives the movement. Without it, nothing changes. With it, even small efforts compound into meaningful progress. The challenge is not to learn more, but to act on what you already know, consistently and without unnecessary delay. Starting is often the most underestimated step, yet it holds the most power. People tend to believe that progress comes from big, perfect actions, but in reality, it begins with something much smaller and often imperfect. The hesitation to start usually comes from the belief that everything needs to be aligned, the right mood, the right plan, the right level of confidence. But waiting for all of that only delays progress. The truth is, nothing needs to be perfect for you to begin. Imperfection is not a weakness in the process. It is part of it. When you start without having everything figured out, you allow yourself to learn through action. You make mistakes, adjust your approach, and improve over time. This is how real progress happens. If you wait until everything feels perfect, you stay stuck in preparation. Starting imperfectly breaks that cycle and moves you into a space where growth is possible. There is also a mental barrier that makes starting feel harder than it actually is. When you think about a task as a whole, it can seem overwhelming. Your mind focuses on the effort required, the time it might take, and the uncertainty of the outcome. This creates resistance, making it easier to avoid the task altogether. But once you take the first step, that resistance begins to fade. The task becomes more manageable because you are no longer thinking about it. You are doing it. Momentum plays a crucial role here. It doesn't exist before action. It is created by action. When you start, even in a small way, you build a sense of movement. That movement makes it easier to continue. One step leads to another, and before you realize it, you are making progress. Without that initial step, momentum never has a chance to develop. Everything remains static, and the task continues to feel difficult. Starting imperfectly also reduces the pressure you place on yourself. When you aim for perfection, every action feels like it has to meet a high standard. This creates fear of failure and increases the likelihood of procrastination. But when you accept that your first attempt doesn't need to be perfect, you give yourself permission to act freely. You shift your focus from doing something flawlessly to simply doing it. Another important aspect is clarity. You often don't fully understand what a task requires until you begin. Thinking about it can only take you so far. Action reveals details that planning cannot. It shows you what works, what doesn't, and what needs to change. This kind of clarity is only gained through experience. The longer you delay starting, the longer you remain uncertain. There is also a confidence-building effect that comes from taking action. Confidence is not something you wait for, it is something you build. Each time you start and follow through, even in a small way, you prove to yourself that you are capable. This creates a positive cycle. Action leads to confidence, makes future action easier. Without that first step, this cycle never begins. It's important to understand that small actions are not insignificant. They accumulate over time. Seems like a minor effort today can lead to meaningful results in the future. The key is consistency. Starting once is helpful, but starting repeatedly is what creates lasting change. Each small action adds to your progress, gradually moving you closer to your goal. There will still be moments when you don't feel like starting. That feeling doesn't disappear completely. The difference is that you learn not to rely. You act anyway. You recognize that the discomfort of starting is temporary, but the benefits of taking action are long-lasting. This shift in mindset makes it easier to push through resistance. Over time, starting becomes less of a challenge. It turns into a habit rather than a struggle. You spend less time thinking about whether to act and more time actually doing the work. This reduces procrastination and increases productivity. The energy that was once spent on hesitation is redirected toward progress. The idea that you need to be fully ready is one of the biggest obstacles to action. Readiness is often created by starting, not before it. When you begin, you adapt, you learn, you grow into the process. Waiting for readiness keeps you in a state of inaction, while starting moves you forward, even if it's not perfect. In the end, progress is not about flawless execution. It's about consistent effort. It's about showing up even when things are unclear, even when you feel unprepared. Starting imperfectly is not a compromise. It is a strategy that allows you to bypass hesitation, build momentum, and create a path forward. What matters is not how perfect your first step is, but that you take it and continue moving, one step at a time. Every day presents a quiet choice that shapes your future more than any big decision ever will. It's the choice between what feels easy right now and what actually moves you forward. Most of the time, this choice doesn't look dramatic. It appears in small moments, whether to start working or delay, whether to stay focused or get distracted, whether to push a little further or stop early. These moments seem insignificant on their own, but together they define the direction of your life. Comfort is always available. It asks very little from you and gives immediate satisfaction. It's the easier path, the one that requires no resistance, no extra effort, no discomfort. That's why it's so tempting. Your mind naturally gravitates toward it because it conserves energy and avoids stress. But while comfort feels good in the moment, it often comes at the cost of progress. It keeps you where you are, repeating the same patterns without moving closer to your goals. Effort, on the other hand, demands something from you. It requires focus, discipline, and sometimes pushing through resistance. It's not always enjoyable, especially at the beginning. There are moments when it feels inconvenient, when you'd rather do anything else. But effort is what creates change. It's what builds skills, develops strength, and turns intentions into results. Without it, nothing evolves. The challenge is that the reward of effort is delayed, while the reward of comfort is immediate. When you choose comfort, you feel relief right away. When you choose effort, the benefits come later. This difference makes it easy to fall into a pattern where short-term satisfaction wins over long-term growth. But over time, these repeated choices begin to show their impact. What felt easy in the moment leads to stagnation, while what felt difficult leads to progress. Consistency is what amplifies this effect. One choice doesn't define you, but repeated choices do. If you consistently choose comfort, you build a habit of avoidance. Tasks become harder to start, discipline weakens, and goals drift further away. On the other hand, if you consistently choose effort, even in small ways, you build resilience. You strengthen your ability to act despite resistance. And over time, what once felt difficult becomes part of your routine. There is also a shift in mindset that comes with choosing effort regularly. You stop seeing challenges as obstacles and start seeing them as necessary steps. Instead of avoiding difficulty, you begin to accept it as part of the process. This doesn't mean you enjoy every moment of effort, but you understand its value. You recognize that growth doesn't happen in comfort, and that every bit of progress requires some level of discomfort. It's important to understand that choosing effort doesn't mean overworking yourself or ignoring rest. Rest has its place, and it's essential for maintaining balance and energy. The difference lies in intention. Rest is purposeful and temporary, while comfort-driven avoidance is unintentional and ongoing. Knowing when you are genuinely recharging versus when you are avoiding effort is key to maintaining progress. Another aspect of this choice is self-respect. When you consistently choose effort, you send a message to yourself that your goals matter. You show that you are willing to invest time and energy into your own growth. This builds a sense of pride and confidence, not from external validation, but from your own action. You begin to trust yourself more because you see that you can follow through. In contrast, repeatedly choosing comfort can lead to frustration. You may have clear goals and strong intentions, but without action, they remain out of reach. This creates a gap between what you want and what you experience. Over time, that gap can lead to doubt and dissatisfaction, not because you lack potential, but because your actions are not aligned with your goals. The key is not to make one perfect choice, but to make better choices more often. There will still be moments when you choose comfort, and that's part of being human. What matters is the overall pattern. If most of your choices lean toward effort, progress becomes inevitable. Small actions, repeated consistently, compound into meaningful results. It also helps to focus on the next decision rather than the entire journey. Thinking about long-term goals can sometimes feel overwhelming, but choosing effort in the present moment is manageable. Each time you make that choice, you reinforce the habit. You make it easier to choose effort again in the future. Over time, the balance begins to shift. Effort becomes less of a struggle and more of a standard. You don't rely on motivation to act because your habits guide you. The discomfort that once held you back loses its power. You move forward with a sense of control, knowing that your progress is the result of your daily decisions. In the end, the life you build is a reflection of the choices you make repeatedly. Comfort may feel good now, but it rarely leads to growth. Effort may feel challenging, but it creates the results you're looking for. When you learn to choose effort more often, you change your trajectory. You move from intention to action, from stagnation to progress, and from where you are to where you want to be, one decision at a time. At the end of it all, nothing changes until you do. Not your goals, not your habits, not your life. You've heard the ideas, you understand the path, and deep down, you already know what needs to be done. The difference now is whether you act on it or let it fade like every other moment of motivation. This is where it counts. Not in thinking, not in planning, but in doing. So take what you realize and turn it into action. Start now, stay consistent, and refuse to fall back into the comfort that once held you still. Because the future you want isn't built by waiting. It's built by the work you choose to do every single day.